The moment I walked into my childhood home and saw my entire extended family sitting around the dining table in complete silence, I knew my life was about to change forever. I'm Halina, and what I'm about to tell you is a story about family betrayal so calculated, so cruel, that it made national headlines. But before we get to how the Wall Street Journal saved my life, let me take you back to where it all began. 6 months earlier, I was living what I thought was my dream. I had just turned 29, and I was the founder and CEO of TechFlow Solutions, a software development company that specialized in creating custom apps for small businesses. For 3 years, I had poured everything I had into this company: my savings, my time, my relationships, and honestly, my sanity. Growing up in a traditional Polish-American family in Chicago, success wasn't just expected, it was demanded. My parents, Maria and Stefan, had immigrated to the United States with nothing but hope and determination. They built a small but successful chain of European delis, and they expected their children to exceed their achievements. My older brother Mark became a doctor, my sister Anna married a lawyer, and then there was me, the entrepreneur, the risk-taker, the one who was supposed to make it big in the tech world. For a while, it looked like I was going to fulfill that prophecy. TechFlow had grown from just me working out of my studio apartment to a team of 12 employees with a beautiful office space in downtown Chicago. We had landed several major contracts, and I was in talks with investors about a Series A funding round that would have valued the company at over $2 million. But then, everything fell apart. It started with my business partner, David, whom I had trusted completely. We had been friends since college, and when I started TechFlow, he was the natural choice to handle the business development side while I focused on the technical aspects. What I didn't know was that David had been embezzling money from our company accounts for over a year. When our biggest client discovered discrepancies in their billing, they launched an investigation that exposed everything. The revelation destroyed us overnight. Our clients pulled their contracts, the investors walked away, and I discovered that David had depleted our operational funds to fuel his gambling addiction. Within 2 weeks, I had to lay off my entire team, close the office, and face the reality that I was personally liable for over $200,000 in business debts. The worst part wasn't the money, it was the shame. I had been so proud, so confident in my success, and now I felt like a complete failure. I moved back into a tiny studio apartment, took on freelance programming work just to pay for groceries, and fell into a depression that made it hard to get out of bed most days. My family's reaction was complicated. On the surface, they were supportive. My parents invited me over for dinner regularly, my siblings offered encouraging words, and everyone kept saying that this was just a temporary setback. But I could see the disappointment in their eyes, hear the whispered conversations that stopped when I walked into a room. For months, I isolated myself. I barely answered phone calls, declined family gatherings, and spent most of my time alone in my apartment, alternating between applying for jobs and staring at the ceiling. I knew I was worrying my family, but I couldn't bring myself to pretend everything was okay when it clearly wasn't. That's when I got the call from my mother. "Halina, sweetheart," she said in that tone she used when she was trying to be diplomatic. "Your father and I think it would be good for you to come home this weekend. We want to have a family discussion about your situation." Something about the way she said situation made my stomach drop, but I agreed. I thought maybe they wanted to offer me a job at one of their delis, or perhaps they had some ideas about how I could restart my career. I was desperate enough to consider anything. So on that cold February evening, I drove to my childhood home in the suburbs, expecting a heart-to-heart with my parents. Instead, I walked into what felt like an intervention. But what I discovered that night wasn't just disappointment about my business failure. It was something far more sinister that would shake me to my core and ultimately expose a scheme so shocking that it would become front-page news. As I stepped through the front door of my parents' house, the smell of my mother's cooking should have been comforting. Instead, it felt ominous. The usual warmth and chaos of family gatherings was replaced by an eerie formality. My parents, my brother Mark and his wife Sarah, my sister Anna and her husband Tom, and even my Aunt Katarzyna and Uncle Piotr were all seated around the dining room table like they were conducting a board meeting. "Halina, please sit down," my father said, gesturing to the empty chair they had left for me at the head of the table. It felt like I was about to be interrogated. My mother cleared her throat and pulled out a manila folder that was thick with documents. "Sweetheart, we've all been very concerned about you since your business ended. We can see that you're struggling, and we think it's time for some tough love." "What do you mean?" I asked, genuinely confused. My brother Mark leaned forward, adopting his doctor voice, the one he used when delivering bad news to patients. "Halina, you've been exhibiting concerning behaviors for months. You've isolated yourself, you're living in squalor, you've made poor financial decisions that have put you in significant debt, and frankly, we're worried about your mental health." "Concerning behaviors," I repeated, feeling defensive. "I lost my business and I'm depressed. That's not exactly abnormal." "It's more than that," Anna chimed in, exchanging glances with the others. "We've been documenting some things, and we think you need professional help." That's when my mother opened the folder and began spreading out photographs on the table. I stared in shock at pictures of my apartment, my messy, cramped studio apartment. Someone had been inside my home, taking pictures of my unmade bed, my dishes in the sink, my clothes scattered around. "How did you get these?" I demanded, my voice rising. "Your landlord is concerned about you too," my father said calmly. "He let us in to check on your welfare." I felt like I was in a nightmare. "You had no right to." "We had every right," my Aunt Katarzyna interrupted, her voice sharp. "We're your family, and you're clearly not capable of taking care of yourself." My Uncle Piotr nodded gravely. "Halina, we've consulted with a lawyer. There are legal mechanisms in place to help family members who are incapacitated." The word hit me like a physical blow. Incapacitated. Are you insane? I'm temporarily down on my luck, but I'm not incapacitated. My mother reached across the table and took my hand, her voice taking on that patronizing tone I remembered from childhood. "Sweetheart, you're about to turn 30 in 3 months. Your grandmother's trust fund becomes available to you then, almost $400,000. In your current state, we're worried you'll make more poor decisions and lose that money too." And there it was, the real reason for this ambush. My grandmother, Babcia Halina, had set up trust funds for all her grandchildren, but with the stipulation that we couldn't access them until we turned 30. The idea was to ensure we were mature enough to handle that kind of money responsibly. I had honestly forgotten about it with everything else going on, but clearly, my family hadn't. "So you want to what exactly?" I asked, though I had a sinking feeling I already knew. Mark pulled out another set of documents. "We've been working with a lawyer to petition the court to have you declared financially incompetent. It's for your own protection, Halina. We would manage your assets until you're better." I stared at them all in disbelief. These people who claimed to love me were sitting around my childhood dining table, calmly discussing how to steal my inheritance and strip away my legal rights. And they were acting like they were doing me a favor. "This is insane," I said, standing up so quickly that my chair fell backward. "I'm not signing anything, and I'm not agreeing to any of this." "Halina, please be reasonable," my father said. "Look at your life objectively. You're living in a studio apartment that costs $800 a month, and you can barely afford that. You've been unemployed for months. You've isolated yourself from everyone who cares about you. These are not the actions of someone who should be managing a significant sum of money." "I've been depressed because I lost my company and my life's work," I shouted. "That doesn't make me incompetent." "Doesn't it?" Anna asked quietly. "Halina, you trusted your business partner completely, and he stole from you. You didn't notice that hundreds of thousands of dollars were missing from your own company's accounts. How is that not a sign of poor judgment?" The words stung because there was a grain of truth in them. I had been naive about David, and I hadn't been monitoring the finances as closely as I should have. But that made me inexperienced, not incompetent. "I don't believe this," I said, grabbing my purse. "I'm leaving." "Halina, wait," my mother called after me. "We're doing this because we love you." I turned back to face them all one more time. If this is love, I'd rather be hated. I stormed out of the house and drove back to my apartment in a rage. But as the anger faded, it was replaced by something much worse: fear. Could they actually do this? Could my own family really have me declared incompetent and take control of my money? Over the next few days, I did research online and discovered that adult guardianship proceedings were more common than I had realized. Families could petition courts to take control of a relative's finances if they could prove that person was unable to manage their own affairs. The evidence they had compiled, the photos, the documentation of my depression and isolation, even statements from former employees about the business failure, might actually be enough to convince a judge. I felt completely trapped. I had no money for a lawyer, no one I could turn to for help, and worst of all, I was starting to doubt myself. Maybe they were right. Maybe I had made such poor decisions that I couldn't be trusted with money. Maybe I really was incompetent. For 2 weeks, I barely left my apartment. I stopped answering phone calls from my family, stopped looking for work, and spent most of my time in bed. I was proving their point with every passing day, but I couldn't seem to stop the downward spiral. Then something happened that changed everything. I was sitting at my computer, mindlessly scrolling through LinkedIn, when I saw a message notification. It was from Jessica Chen, who had been one of the investors interested in TechFlow before everything collapsed. The message was short. "Hi Halina, I've been following your story and wanted to reach out. Would you be available for a phone call this week?" I almost deleted it without responding. The last thing I wanted was to rehash my business failure with someone who had wisely decided not to invest in my company. But something made me write back and agree to a call. "Halina," Jessica said when we spoke the next day, "I want you to know that what happened to you wasn't your fault. David's embezzlement was sophisticated and well hidden. Even experienced CFOs have been fooled by similar schemes." It was the first time in months that someone had said it wasn't my fault, and I started crying right there on the phone. "I've been following up on David's case," Jessica continued, "and I've discovered that he had a history of financial fraud that somehow wasn't caught in background checks. You were his victim, not his accomplice or enabler." She went on to tell me that David had been arrested and charged with multiple counts of embezzlement and fraud, not just from my company but from 2 previous employers. It was validation that I desperately needed, but it also raised new questions. "Jessica," I said carefully, "my family has been telling me that my failure to detect David's theft shows I have poor judgment. They're trying to have me declared financially incompetent." There was a long pause on the other end of the line. "Halina, that's not normal family concern. That sounds like financial exploitation." She went on to explain that she had a background in financial journalism before becoming an investor, and she specialized in cases of family financial abuse. What my family was doing, using my temporary difficulties as justification to seize control of my assets, fit a pattern she had seen before. "Would you be willing to document what's happening?" she asked. "I think this story might be of public interest, especially given the upcoming changes to adult guardianship laws in Illinois." The idea of exposing my family's scheme publicly terrified me, but I was running out of options. If I didn't fight back, I would lose not just my inheritance, but my basic right to make my own decisions. "What would I need to do?" I asked. Jessica's advice was simple but crucial: document everything. Record conversations with my family if it was legal to do so in Illinois. It was, as long as one party consented. Keep copies of all the paperwork they had shown me. Write down dates, times, and details of every interaction. "And Halina," she added, "I have a contact at the Wall Street Journal who covers family financial fraud. If you're willing, I think she'd be very interested in your story." Over the next month, I became a detective investigating my own family. I started recording phone conversations when my parents called to check on me. I used a hidden camera app on my phone during family visits. I requested copies of all the documents they had compiled from the lawyer they were working with. What I discovered was far worse than I had imagined. The planning had been going on for over a year, starting well before my business failed. I found emails between my parents and my siblings discussing my concerning spending habits and my poor business decisions as early as 6 months before TechFlow collapsed. They had been building a case against me, gathering evidence of my supposed incompetence while pretending to be supportive. Even more disturbing, I learned that the lawyer they were working with Robert Kowalski, specialized in these types of guardianship cases. His client list was full of families who had successfully gained control of relatives' finances, often for very questionable reasons. Some of his past clients had used adult guardianship laws to seize control of elderly parents' assets or disabled siblings' trust funds. I also discovered that my family's interest in my trust fund wasn't just about protecting me from myself. My uncle Peter was in significant financial trouble with his construction business, and my parents were facing increased competition from larger grocery chains. They needed capital, and my inheritance represented a convenient source of funding that they could access if they could gain legal control over my finances. The most shocking discovery came when I managed to get my hands on the full petition that Kowalski had drafted for the court. It included statements from people I had never even met, claiming to have witnessed my erratic behavior and poor judgment. Some of the incidents they described had never happened. Others were gross exaggerations of normal situations. For example, one statement claimed that I had been verbally abusive to service workers at a restaurant where I had allegedly caused a scene. The truth was that I had politely sent back an undercooked chicken breast at a family dinner 2 months earlier. Another statement described me as hoarding trash in my apartment, when the photos clearly showed nothing more than a few days' worth of dishes and some clothes that needed to be put away. It was a coordinated character assassination, and it was being orchestrated by the people who were supposed to love and protect me. Armed with all this evidence, I finally reached out to the Wall Street Journal contact that Jessica had mentioned. Her name was Sarah Martinez, and she was a senior reporter who covered financial crimes and family law issues. "Halina," she said after I had explained my situation, "what you're describing is part of a much larger pattern we've been investigating. Adult guardianship abuse is a growing problem, especially in states with less stringent oversight. Your case could be very important in exposing how these systems can be manipulated." Sarah explained that the Journal had been working on a major investigative piece about guardianship abuse, and my story could provide a crucial perspective on how families exploit these laws. She was particularly interested in the role of lawyers like Kowalski, who seemed to specialize in questionable guardianship cases. "Would you be willing to go on the record?" she asked. "I should warn you that this will likely destroy your relationship with your family permanently." I thought about everything they had put me through: the lies, the manipulation, the calculated attempt to steal my independence and my future. Then I thought about other people who might be going through the same thing, people who didn't have the resources or the connections to fight back. "Yes," I said, "I'll do it." The Wall Street Journal investigation moved quickly once I agreed to participate. Sarah Martinez and her team spent 3 weeks verifying my story, interviewing other clients of Robert Kowalski, and researching similar cases across the country. What they found was disturbing enough to warrant front-page coverage. The article, titled "When Family Love Turns Predatory: The Rise of Guardianship Abuse," was published on a Tuesday morning in March, just 2 weeks before my 30th birthday. My story was the lead example, but it was part of a broader investigation that exposed systematic abuse of adult guardianship laws across multiple states. The piece revealed that Kowalski had been involved in over 200 guardianship cases in the past 5 years, with a success rate that was statistically improbable unless he was gaming the system. Many of his clients were family members seeking control over relatives' assets, and the evidence presented in court often followed similar patterns: allegations of poor judgment, mental health issues, and financial irresponsibility that were difficult to disprove. More importantly, the investigation revealed that many of these cases resulted in the ward's assets being depleted through management fees and necessary expenses that primarily benefited the guardians. It was a legal form of theft, sanctioned by courts that were supposed to protect vulnerable people. The morning the article was published, my phone started ringing at 6 a.m. The first call was from my mother. "Halina, how could you do this to us?" she screamed into the phone. "We're your family, we were trying to help you." "By stealing my inheritance and having me declared incompetent," I replied calmly. "That's not help, Mom, that's financial abuse. You've destroyed our reputation, our business. How are we supposed to face our community now?" I felt a surge of the anger I had been suppressing for months. Maybe you should have thought about that before you decided to betray your own daughter. The calls continued throughout the day. My siblings, my aunt and uncle, even some family friends who had read the article. Some were angry, some were defensive, and a few were actually apologetic once they understood the full scope of what had been planned. My brother Mark called that evening, his voice shaky. Halina, I didn't know about all the fake statements in the court documents. I thought we were just trying to help you get back on your feet. Did you know about the photos taken in my apartment without permission? I asked. Yes, but... Did you know about the plan to use my inheritance to fund Uncle Pieter's business? There was a long pause. I suspected, but I told myself it was temporary, that we'd pay you back. Mark, you're a doctor. You know the difference between helping someone and exploiting them. You chose to participate in a scheme to have your own sister declared mentally incompetent so you could steal her money. There's no version of that story where you're the good guy. He hung up without another word. The fallout was swift and severe. The Illinois State Bar opened an investigation into Robert Kowalski's practices. The state legislature fast-tracked reforms to adult guardianship laws that would require more stringent evidence and independent oversight. And my family's reputation in our tight-knit Polish-American community was completely destroyed. More personally, the court case they had filed against me was immediately dismissed once the judge read the Wall Street Journal article and reviewed the evidence of fabricated statements. I gained access to my trust fund on my 30th birthday without any restrictions, and I also received a formal apology from the court for allowing the case to proceed as far as it had. But the most important outcome was personal. For the first time in months, I felt like myself again. The validation from the investigation, the support from Sarah Martinez and Jessica Chen, and the knowledge that I had fought back against people who had tried to destroy me, it all gave me a sense of strength I hadn't felt since before TechFlow collapsed. I used part of my inheritance to pay off the business debts from TechFlow, which officially closed that chapter of my life. But I also started planning my next venture, this time with a much better understanding of business partnerships, financial oversight, and the importance of trusting my instincts. 6 months later, I launched a new company called Guardian Tech, which develops software solutions to help families manage elderly care and financial planning transparently. The irony wasn't lost on me that my family's attempt to exploit guardianship laws had inspired me to create technology that would make such exploitation more difficult. The business has been successful beyond my expectations. We've helped hundreds of families navigate complex care decisions without the secrecy and manipulation that often leads to abuse. And every time we prevent a family financial crisis, I think about how my own crisis led me to this work. As for my family relationships, they've been permanently changed. My parents and I haven't spoken since the article was published. My Uncle Pieter declared bankruptcy and moved to Florida. My Aunt Katarzyna sends me Christmas cards, but we don't see each other. However, my brother Mark eventually reached out after several months of silence. He had gone through therapy to understand how he had participated in what he now recognized as financial abuse. We've slowly rebuilt a relationship, though it will never be the same as it was before. My sister Anna took longer to come around, but she eventually admitted that she had been uncomfortable with the plan from the beginning, but didn't know how to speak up against our parents. We're working on rebuilding trust, but it's a slow process. The most surprising relationship development came from my cousin Michael, Pieter's son, who reached out to apologize for his father's actions and to let me know that he had been horrified by what he learned from the article. We had never been particularly close, but we've developed a friendship based on shared family trauma and a commitment to breaking cycles of manipulation. Looking back on that night when I walked into my parents' house and found my entire family plotting against me, I can see now that it was the beginning of the most difficult but ultimately most transformative period of my life. I learned that family loyalty has limits, that trust must be earned and re-earned, and that sometimes the people who claim to love you are the ones most likely to betray you. But I also learned that I'm stronger than I ever imagined. I survived the loss of my business, the betrayal of my business partner, and the calculated attack from my own family. Not only did I survive, but I found a way to turn that pain into purpose. If you're watching this and you're going through something similar, whether it's family manipulation, financial abuse, or just the aftermath of a major life failure, I want you to know that you're not as powerless as you might feel. Document everything. Trust your instincts. Find people outside your immediate circle who can give you perspective. And remember that the people who truly love you will support your independence, not try to control it. The Wall Street Journal article led to dozens of similar stories being reported across the country. It turns out that my family's scheme wasn't unique. It was part of a much larger pattern of financial exploitation that thrives in the shadows of family relationships. By bringing my story into the light, we helped expose a system that was harming vulnerable people every day. Today, Guardian Tech employs 15 people, and we're expanding into new markets every quarter. I own my own home, I've paid off all my debts, and I have complete control over my financial decisions. More importantly, I've learned to trust myself again. I still think about that night sometimes, sitting around my childhood dining table while my family discussed how to strip away my legal rights. It was one of the worst nights of my life, but it was also the night that ultimately set me free. Because sometimes, the worst betrayal leads to the greatest comeback. And sometimes, the family that tries to destroy you ends up giving you exactly what you need to rebuild yourself stronger than ever before. If my story resonates with you, please share it. If you know someone who might be facing family financial abuse, send them this video. And if you're going through something similar right now, remember, you have more power than you think. You just have to be brave enough to use it. Thank you for listening to my story. This is Halina, and I'll see you in the next one.